The Chinook's rotors kicked up dust devils across the landing zone, and Corporal Elena Voss stepped down onto Afghan soil with her rifle case gripped tight in one hand and her pack slung over her shoulder. The heat hit her like a physical wall, dry and relentless, carrying the smell of diesel fuel and sand. Forward operating base, Rhino sprawled before her in a maze of HESCO barriers and weathered plywood structures, everything the same shade of tan as the mountains rising in the distance. She was 21 years old and looked younger, with a slender build that made her body armor seem oversized and a face that still carried traces of the teenager she'd been just 3 years ago. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her green eyes tracked across the base with the careful attention to detail that had gotten her through Scout Sniper School at the top of her class. A staff sergeant materialized from the Tactical Operations Center, clipboard in hand, squinting at her in the bright afternoon sun. "Need your orders, Corporal," he said, and she handed them over with the crisp efficiency that had been drilled into her since boot camp. He scanned the paperwork, eyebrows rising slightly. "Scout Sniper, huh? You just graduate?" "6 weeks ago, Staff Sergeant," Elena replied. He nodded toward a long structure with sandbags stacked around its perimeter. "Sniper section is in Building 3. Gunnery Sergeant Brennan runs the show." He paused, something unreadable crossing his face. "Fair warning, they're a tight crew. Been working together for 2 deployments." Elena felt the familiar weight of that particular tone, the one that said you're new and you're going to have to prove yourself. She'd heard it before. "Understood, Staff Sergeant." Before we go further into Elena's story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe military service runs in families where you're from, or perhaps you've witnessed young people proving themselves against impossible odds. Building 3 smelled like gun oil and strong coffee. 3 men sat around a plywood table, rifles disassembled for cleaning, parts spread across worn towels. They looked up as Elena entered, and the conversation died mid-sentence. The oldest of them, a broad-shouldered man with gray threading through his high and tight haircut and sharp blue eyes that assessed her in an instant, set down the bolt carrier group he'd been inspecting. "Help you, Corporal?" he asked, his voice carrying the flat tone of someone already making assumptions. "Corporal Elena Voss reporting for duty, Gunnery Sergeant." Elena kept her posture straight, her voice level. "I'm assigned to the sniper section." Brennan stood slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. He was maybe 6'2", 15 years her senior, with the kind of weathered face that came from multiple combat deployments. The other 2 Marines, both staff sergeants, exchanged glances that Elena pretended not to notice. "Voss," Brennan said as if tasting the name. "Yeah, we got the notification." "Fresh out of school?" "Yes, Gunnery Sergeant." He looked her up and down, not bothering to hide his evaluation. "You look about 17, he said finally. The other Marines chuckled, not quite cruel, but not exactly friendly either. "How old are you actually?" 21, Gunnery Sergeant." Brennan shook his head slowly, something between amusement and resignation in his expression. "Christ, they're sending us babies now." He gestured to the other men. "Staff Sergeant Ibarra, our senior spotter. Staff Sergeant Shun, 2nd team." He didn't introduce the 3rd Marine, a younger staff sergeant who was trying not to smirk. Elena nodded to each of them in turn. She'd expected this, had prepared herself for it, but that didn't make the casual dismissal any easier to swallow. Her class ranking, her qualification scores, the countless hours on the range, none of it mattered here. "Not yet. What's your rifle?" Ibarra asked, nodding toward her case. He was lean and dark-haired, with eyes that missed nothing. "M40A5, Staff Sergeant. Standard issue. Scope?" Schmidt and Bender, 3-12. Brennan sat back down, picked up his bolt carrier group again. "What was your longest confirmed kill in training?" 1,200 meters, Gunnery Sergeant. 1,200, Brennan repeated, glancing at Ibarra. "In California, right? Nice weather, controlled conditions, no one shooting back?" "Yes, Gunnery Sergeant." "Well, Corporal, this isn't California." He slid the bolt carrier back into its receiver with practiced ease. "Out here the wind doesn't behave like it does on a range. The targets shoot back, and mistakes get people killed. You understand that? I do, Gunnery Sergeant. Good. He didn't look at her, focused on reassembling his rifle. You'll bunk in Building 7 with the female Marines. For now, you'll be on base security rotations, pulling guard shifts, helping maintain equipment. We'll see about integrating you into operations after you've had time to acclimate. Elena felt something tighten in her chest but kept her face neutral. Gunnery Sergeant, I'm qualified for operational deployment. My orders indicate immediate integration into sniper operations. Brennan's hands stopped moving. He looked up at her, and there was steel in his gaze now. Your orders indicate assignment to my section, Corporal. How I utilize personnel in my section is my decision. Is that clear? Crystal clear, Gunnery Sergeant. The silence stretched out, broken only by the hum of a generator outside and distant voices from across the compound. Chen had stopped cleaning his rifle to watch, clearly curious how this would play out. Elena knew she was at a crossroads. Push back, and she'd be labeled difficult, a problem child who didn't respect the chain of command. Accept it, and she'd be sidelined indefinitely, wasting months proving herself worthy of doing the job she'd already been trained and certified to do. She chose acceptance, for now. Understood, Gunnery Sergeant. Where'd you like me to start? Brennan's expression softened slightly, perhaps appreciating that she hadn't pushed the issue. Stow your gear, get settled. Report back here at 1700. We'll inventory your equipment and get you set up on the duty roster. Aye, Gunnery Sergeant. Elena turned to leave, feeling their eyes on her back. As she reached the door, Brennan's voice stopped her. Voss. She turned. Yes, Gunnery Sergeant. For what it's worth, Brennan said, his tone a fraction less harsh. It's nothing personal. I've been doing this job for 15 years. Lost good men because someone green made a mistake under pressure. Until I know what you can do, until I trust that you won't freeze up or miscalculate when it matters. You're a liability I can't afford. I understand, Gunnery Sergeant, Elena said quietly. And for what it's worth, I don't freeze. Brennan almost smiled. We'll see, Boot. We'll see. Elena found Building 7 and claimed an empty bunk in the corner, as far from the door as possible. 2 other female Marines were there, an admin clerk and a combat medic, both friendly enough as they helped her understand the base layout and routine. But neither of them were snipers. Neither of them understood what it felt like to spend months learning a craft only to be told you weren't trusted to practice it. That evening, she reported back to Building 3 as ordered, and Brennan walked her through equipment inventory with professional efficiency. Her rifle, her spotting scope, her rangefinder, her environmental meters, all of it inspected and logged. He asked technical questions, testing her knowledge, and she answered each one with the precision her instructors had demanded. She could see him reassessing slightly, recognizing that she at least knew the theory, but his fundamental skepticism remained unchanged. You'll pull tower guard tonight. Midnight to 0400, he said finally. Chen will show you where. Tomorrow you'll help clean weapons after the teams come back from patrol. Questions? No, Gunnery Sergeant. Good. Dismissed. The guard tower offered a view of nothing but darkness and distant mountains silhouetted against stars. Elena stood her watch with her rifle ready and her mind occupied with calculations she couldn't shut off. Wind speed, temperature drop, how the cooling air would affect trajectory over various distances. It was a habit now, automatic as breathing, measuring the world in mil-dots and ballistic coefficients. Morning came with the call to prayer, drifting across from a nearby village, haunting and beautiful in the pre-dawn stillness. Elena climbed down from the tower as her relief arrived, muscles stiff from 4 hours of standing, and made her way to the chow hall for breakfast that tasted like cardboard but filled the empty space in her stomach. The next 3 days followed the same pattern. Guard duty, equipment maintenance, cleaning weapons that weren't hers, watching the sniper teams prep for missions she wasn't clear to join. Brennan ran his section with iron discipline, and Elena observed everything. How Ibarra calculated wind drift, how Chen set up his high position during training exercises, the way Brennan read terrain features and predicted enemy movement patterns. She absorbed it all silently, waiting for her chance. On the 4th morning, Brennan announced range training for the whole section. The Marines would zero their rifles and conduct practice engagements at various distances. Elena was assigned to assist, which meant spotting for shooters, recording data, and setting up target arrays downrange. It wasn't shooting, but it was closer to her actual job than cleaning weapons in a dusty building. The range sat 2 miles from the main base, a stretch of hardpan desert with earthen berms and target stand arranged from 200 meters out to 1,500. The morning sun was already brutal by 800, heat shimmer distorting the air above the sand. Brennan positioned his Marines at the firing line, while Elena helped Ibarra set up the spotting scopes and data books. "You know how to run a Kestrel?" Ibarra asked, handing her the handheld weather meter. It was a test, she knew, seeing if she could handle the basic tools of the trade. Elena took the device and clicked through the screens with practiced ease. Current temperature 89 degrees, barometric pressure 29.7 inches, humidity 18%, wind from the southwest at 7 knots. She glanced at the flags downrange, doing the mental math instantly. Call it 8 miles per hour, full value at target distance. Ibarra's eyebrows rose fractionally. "You did that calculation in your head?" "Yes, Staff Sergeant. The formula is straightforward once you account for the angle." He studied her for a moment, something shifting in his expression. "Most boots need the ballistic calculator for that." Elena shrugged. "I like math, Staff Sergeant. It makes sense to me." The shooting began, each Marine engaging targets at progressive distances. Chun shot first, solid groupings at 600 meters, then 800. Brennan followed, his decades of experience evident in the smooth efficiency of his movements. Each shot deliberate, each impact within inches of center mass. When Staff Sergeant Marcus Torres took his position, the newest member of the section after Elena, he rushed his breathing and pulled 2 shots wide at 1,000 meters. Brennan called a pause, walked Torres through proper respiratory control again. Elena watched, noting how Brennan's teaching style was firm but patient with the male Marine, showing him where his technique faltered. She wondered if he'd extend the same patience to her, if given the chance, or if his bias would color everything she did. "Voss," Ibarra called. "You're up on the spotting scope. Call wind corrections for Torres." Elena moved to the scope, settling behind the powerful optic that brought the 1,000-meter target into sharp focus. Torres repositioned himself, adjusting his cheek weld on his rifle stock. The wind had shifted slightly, now quartering from right to left, maybe 9 miles per hour with gusts hitting 12. "Wind right to left, 8 to 10 sustained, gust to 12, Elena said calmly, watching the mirage through the scope. "At this distance, call it 4 mils left correction." Torres adjusted his scope turrets, chamber round. His breathing steadied, and Elena watched his rifle cant slightly to compensate for the wind. The shot broke clean, and she saw the impact. "Hit, center mass, 12 o'clock from point of aim," she reported. Wind correction was good. Brennan had been watching from behind them, arms crossed over his chest. "Torres," he said, "you pulled that shot high. Your breathing wasn't settled." "Actually, Gunnery Sergeant," Elena said before she could stop herself, "the shot was high because the temperature increased 3 degrees in the last 15 minutes. Heat causes air density decrease, which reduces drag on the bullet. At 1,000 meters, that's approximately 0.7 mils of elevation change." He held his zero, but the environment shifted. The silence that followed felt heavy. Every Marine on the line had stopped what they were doing to listen. Brennan's jaw tightened, and Elena immediately regretted speaking. She just contradicted him in front of his entire section, challenged his assessment based on environmental data most snipers wouldn't have caught. Brennan walked over slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Is that right, Corporal? You think temperature change caused that impact shift?" Elena swallowed, but held her ground. "Yes, Gunnery Sergeant. The ballistic data supports it." He stared at her for a long moment, then turned to Ibarra. "Check the Kestrel. What's our current temperature?" Ibarra glanced at the device, still in Elena's hand. 92 degrees, Gunnery Sergeant. Was 89 when we started this iteration. Brennan looked back at Elena, something unreadable in his expression. And you calculated that impact shift in your head? Real time? Yes, Gunnery Sergeant. The formula accounts for air density changes based on temperature, humidity, and pressure. When you know the baseline ballistic coefficient for your ammunition and the current environmental factors, the math is consistent. Show me, Brennan said flatly. Elena felt her heart rate pick up, but kept her voice steady. Standard M118LR round, .308 caliber, 175 grain, Sierra Match King. Muzzle velocity, 25-40 feet per second. Ballistic coefficient .496 G1 model. At 89 degrees with current humidity and pressure, time of flight at 1,000 meters is approximately 1.4 seconds. Air density at 89 degrees versus 92 degrees represents a decrease of 0.6%. That decrease reduces drag proportionally, which over 1,000 meters translates to roughly 0.7 mils less bullet drop, resulting in a high impact if the shooter maintains original zero. The Marines were staring at her now. Chen had actually stopped cleaning his rifle to listen. Torres looked confused, trying to follow the rapid-fire calculations. Ibarra was nodding slowly, verifying her math against his own mental estimates. Brennan's expression hadn't changed. That's book learning, Corporal. Theory from a classroom. Out here, there are 1,000 variables you can't account for on paper. Respectfully, Gunnery Sergeant, that's why you verify and adjust, Elena said quietly. The math gives you the starting point. Experience tells you how to adapt when reality doesn't match the calculation. But ignoring the baseline data means you're guessing instead of knowing. Another silence stretched out, this one even more uncomfortable. Elena knew she'd crossed a line, pushed back against a gunnery sergeant with 15 years of combat experience. Part of her wanted to apologize, to back down, and accept whatever consequences came. But another part, the part that had fought to earn her place in Scout Sniper School despite every obstacle, refused to pretend she didn't know what she was talking about. Brennan finally turned back to Torres. Adjust your elevation 0.7 mils down and shoot again. Torres made the adjustment, settled back into position, controlled his breathing carefully. The shot broke, and Elena tracked it through the spotting scope. Hit, center mass, dead center, she called. Brennan nodded once, then walked away without another word. The tension broke gradually as the other Marines returned to their shooting. Ibarra caught Elena's eye and gave her the slightest nod of acknowledgement, but she couldn't tell if that was approval or warning. Chen approached her during the break, canteen in hand. That was either really smart or really stupid. Kid, he said, not unkindly. Gunny doesn't like being corrected in front of the boys. I wasn't trying to correct him. Staff Sergeant, Elena replied. I was just explaining the data. Chen snorted. Yeah, well, out here explanation and correction look pretty similar. Just watch yourself. The training continued through the afternoon, and Elena remained on spotting duty, calling wind and elevation corrections that proved consistently accurate. By 1,500 hours, when Brennan called an end to the session, every Marine in the section had improved their hit percentage at extended ranges based on her real-time environmental analysis. As they packed equipment, Brennan approached her one more time. Voss, he said quietly, so only she could hear. You've got a good head for numbers. I'll give you that. But knowledge isn't the same as skill, and skill isn't the same as performance under pressure. You understand? Yes, Gunnery Sergeant. Good. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. Tomorrow there's an intelligence briefing. High-value targets spotted in Sector 7. You'll sit in, observe only. Consider it part of your acclimation. Elena felt a small surge of hope, but kept it off her face. Understood, Gunnery Sergeant. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Brennan said. You're still a long way from proving you belong here. The intelligence briefing took place in the Tactical Operations Center at 0700, and Elena arrived early, taking a seat in the back row where she could observe without drawing attention. The TOC smelled like stale coffee and electronic equipment, its walls covered with maps marked with enemy positions and patrol routes. Captain Dwight Hollister stood at the front, a seasoned infantry officer with salt and pepper hair and the kind of steady presence that came from leading men through multiple combat tours. Brennan entered with his sniper section, and Elena noted how the other Marines deferred to him naturally, decades of experience commanding respect without effort. He glanced at her once, acknowledging her presence with a slight nod, then focused on the captain as Lieutenant Nora Ashford from Intelligence began her presentation. "Gentlemen and Corporal," Ashford said, nodding toward Elena, "we have confirmed sightings of Rashid Kazemi in Sector 7. She clicked a remote and a photograph appeared on the screen, showing a bearded man in his 40s with hard eyes and traditional Afghan dress. Kazemi is a senior Taliban commander responsible for at least 14 IED attacks in this province over the past 8 months. 43 coalition casualties attributed to his network. The room grew quieter, more focused. Every man there knew someone who'd been hit by an IED or had been close to one themselves. Kazemi wasn't just another target. He was personal. SIGINT intercepted communications, placing him at a compound in the Dashdak Valley. Ashford continued. Ground reconnaissance confirms armed guards and vehicle movement consistent with high-value target protocols. He's meeting with other regional commanders, likely planning operations for the upcoming offensive season. Hollister stepped forward. We have a narrow window. Intelligence suggests he'll remain in location for 72 hours maximum. After that, he'll disperse back into the population and we won't get another clean shot at him for months. He looked at Brennan. Gunny, I want your best team on this. Long-range observation and interdiction if opportunity presents. Brennan stood, moving to the map on the wall. What's the distance from viable observation points to target compound? Ashford consulted her notes. Primary OP would be here, she said, pointing to a ridgeline northeast of the valley, approximately 2,800 meters to the compound. Secondary OP to the west offers 2,600 meters, but problematic sightlines due to terrain masking. Brennan studied the map, his tactical mind processing angles and approaches. 2,800 is doable. Wind patterns in that valley? Prevailing southwest during morning hours, shifting to west-northwest by afternoon, Ashford replied. Typical velocity 10 to 15 knots with gusts to 20. Temperature range 60 degrees at dawn to 95 by midday. Elena listened intently, her mind already calculating the ballistic challenges. 2,800 meters wasn't impossibly long for a trained sniper, but the shifting wind patterns and dramatic temperature swings would create significant complications. Every environmental variable would need constant monitoring and adjustment. One miscalculation could mean the difference between a clean kill and a complete miss that would alert Kazemi and blow the entire operation. Rules of engagement, Captain? Brennan asked. PID required on Kazemi specifically, Hollister said. We need confirmed visual identification before authorization to engage. No collateral damage tolerance. This needs to be surgical. Understood, sir. Brennan turned to his section. Ibarra, your primary spotter. Chun, your shooter. Torres and Williams, security element. We insert via vehicle to Grid November Bravo for Forensics. Then Foot Patrol 3 clicks to the OP. Wheels up at 20-100 tonight. Elena felt the opportunity slipping away even as it was being planned. Chun was a solid sniper, competent and experienced, but she'd watched him shoot. He was good at ranges under 2,000 meters, comfortable and confident. Beyond that, his calculations slowed down, his uncertainty showing in hesitation before each shot. At 2,800 meters, with those wind conditions, hesitation could be fatal to mission success. She remained silent, knowing her place. This was Brennan's decision to make, and she was still the untested boot in his eyes. But her mind wouldn't stop working the problem, couldn't stop seeing the variables that would challenge Shen's abilities. The briefing continued with logistics and contingency planning. Extract procedures if compromised, communication protocols, emergency medical evacuation routes. All the careful preparation that turned a concept into an executable mission. Elena absorbed every detail, professional enough to learn even from operations she wouldn't be part of. As the meeting broke up, Lieutenant Ashford approached her. Corporal Voss, correct? Yes, ma'am. Ashford studied her with intelligent gray eyes. I reviewed your file. top of your class at Scout Sniper School. Highest scores in fieldcraft and long-range marksmanship they'd seen in 3 years. Elena felt a flush of pride, but kept her expression neutral. I had good instructors, ma'am. Your chief instructor wrote in his evaluation that you have an almost supernatural ability to read environmental conditions, Ashford said. He specifically noted your mathematical aptitude for ballistic calculation. I'm decent with numbers, ma'am. Ashford glanced toward where Brennan was reviewing maps with his team. The gunnery sergeant is one of the best snipers in the Corps, but he's also traditional, maybe to a fault. He believes experience trumps everything else. Elena wasn't sure how to respond to that, so she said nothing. Ashford smiled slightly. I'm just saying, sometimes the best tool for the job isn't the one with the most miles on it. Sometimes it's the one engineered for the specific task. She nodded once and walked away, leaving Elena to wonder what exactly that meant. The rest of the day passed in preparation activities Elena wasn't directly involved in. She pulled another guard shift, cleaned weapons, and tried not to think about the mission launching that night. At 2100, she watched from the perimeter as the sniper team loaded into vehicles, their gear carefully packed, and their faces already settling into mission focus. Brennan gave final instructions, checked his equipment one last time, then climbed into the lead MRAP. The vehicles rolled out through the main gate, red taillights disappearing into the darkness. Elena returned to her bunk, but sleep wouldn't come. She lay in the darkness, calculating, running through the environmental factors, the distance, the timing. In her mind, she built a complete ballistic solution for a 2,800-meter shot in Dashdak Valley conditions, adjusting for wind, temperature, barometric pressure, even the Coriolis effect at that range. When she finally slept, her dreams were full of numbers scrolling past like rain, trajectories arcing through space, bullets flying true toward targets she couldn't quite see. She woke at 0500 to the sound of radio chatter drifting through the base. The mission team had reached their observation point and established Overwatch. Now came the waiting, the patient surveillance that could last hours or days before opportunity presented itself. Elena went through her morning routine mechanically, eating breakfast without tasting it, checking equipment she wasn't using, trying to stay busy while her mind remained fixed on that ridgeline 20 kilometers away. Other Marines went about their duties, unaware or unconcerned with the sniper mission in progress. For them, it was just another day on deployment. By noon, word filtered through the base that Kazemi had been spotted entering the compound. Visual confirmation positive, security element in place, target moving between buildings. Chun had a shot opportunity at 1400 hours, but wind conditions were unfavorable. He'd held fire, waiting for a better window. Elena found herself at the range, unable to stay idle any longer. She brought her own rifle, her M40A5 that had barely been out of its case since her arrival. On the 1,000-meter line, she set up and began shooting, working through her own environmental calculations, confirming her baseline data. Each shot reinforced what she already knew. Her fundamentals were solid, her calculations were accurate, and she could make shots that would challenge snipers with twice her time in service. But none of that mattered if no one trusted her to take them. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as she packed her equipment. Her radio crackled with routine traffic, patrols checking in, logistics coordination, the mundane communication that kept a forward operating base running. Nothing from the sniper team. They maintained radio silence, except for critical updates, professional discipline in a high-stakes mission. Elena returned to Building 3 and began the meditative process of cleaning her rifle, breaking it down to its component parts, inspecting each piece with the careful attention her instructors had demanded. The familiar routine calmed her mind, focused her thoughts. Oil and solvent, brush and cloth, each motion practiced 10,000 times until it became muscle memory. She was reassembling the bolt when Chen's voice came over the radio, tension evident even through the static. TOC, this is Overwatch 2. Target displaced to secondary location. Current distance to target approximately 4,000 meters. Beyond effective engagement range. Request guidance. Elena's hands stopped moving. For 1,000 meters. That was beyond standard doctrine, beyond what most military snipers would even attempt. The .308 round they were using could physically reach that distance, but accuracy became increasingly theoretical past 3,000 meters. Wind drift alone could push a bullet several feet off target, and calculating all the environmental factors with precision became exponentially more difficult. She listened as Captain Hollister responded, his voice measured and professional. Overwatch 2. Maintain observation. We're evaluating options. For 1,000 meters, Elena whispered to herself. In her mind, the numbers began flowing automatically, building the solution piece by piece, every variable accounted for. The Tactical Operations Center had transformed into a hub of controlled urgency by the time Elena arrived. She hadn't been summoned, but something pulled her there anyway, an instinct that this situation was evolving into something critical. Captain Hollister stood over the communication station with Lieutenant Ashford beside him, both studying a laptop displaying real-time imagery from the observation post. Brennan's voice came through the speaker, gravelly with frustration. "Sir, we have clear visual on Kazemi. He's in an open courtyard meeting with at least 5 other military-age males. This is our window, but the distance is prohibitive. Chin estimates 4,200 meters, possibly more, depending on exact elevation differential." Hollister leaned toward the microphone. "Can you reposition closer?" "Negative, sir. There's no covered approach. The valley floor is completely open terrain. Any movement toward target location would compromise our position and alert the entire compound. We'd lose him." Elena stood near the back wall, watching the situation unfold. On the laptop screen, she could see thermal imagery of the compound, heat signatures moving in what appeared to be a central courtyard. One signature, presumably Kazemi, gestured animatedly while others stood in a semicircle around him. Whatever meeting was happening, it carried obvious importance. "What's the longest confirmed kill in theater currently?" Hollister asked, directing the question to Ashford. The lieutenant consulted her tablet. "British sniper made a shot at 3,400 meters in Helmand Province, 2009. That's the record. U.S. Forces' longest is 3,100 meters. Marine sniper in Marja, 2010. So 4,000 meters is what? Theoretically possible." Hollister's voice carried the weight of a commander trying to balance mission requirements against realistic capabilities. "Theoretically, yes, sir," Ashford replied. "Practically, the number of variables at that range becomes almost impossible to calculate accurately. Wind drift alone could push the round several meters off target. Temperature gradients, air density changes, even the Earth's rotation becomes a factor." Over the radio, Ibarra's voice joined the conversation. "Sir, we've taken 3 practice shots at distance markers. At 4,000 meters, our standard calculations are off by significant margins. The environmental conditions here are creating unpredictable effects. Wind is gusting between 12 and 22 knots, shifting direction every few minutes. Temperature differential between our position and target area is at least 15 degrees. Elena's mind worked through the problem automatically. At 4,000 meters, a 5 mph wind variation could shift impact point by 3 feet. A 10-degree temperature change would affect air density enough to alter trajectory by 18 inches. Barometric pressure, humidity, elevation difference, even the Coriolis effect from Earth's rotation, all of it compounded exponentially at extended range. Chin's voice came through, and Elena could hear the uncertainty in it. "Sir, I'm not confident I can make this shot. The conditions are beyond anything I've trained for. I don't want to take a low percentage shot and compromise the mission." Hollister closed his eyes briefly, the weight of command evident in his expression. "Overwatch 2, stand by." He turned to Ashford. "How long before Kazemi leaves that courtyard?" "Based on observed patterns, probably 30 minutes maximum," she said. "These meetings are typically brief. Once he goes back inside, we lose line of sight and likely won't get another opportunity. 30 minutes to make a decision that could eliminate a high-value target responsible for dozens of American casualties, or let him slip away to kill more soldiers in the months ahead." Elena watched Hollister weigh the impossible calculus of combat leadership. "Sir," Elena said quietly. Every head in the TOC turned toward her. She felt her heart rate spike, but kept her voice steady. "I can calculate a solution for that shot." Hollister studied her for a long moment. "You're Corporal Voss, the new sniper." "Yes, sir." "How exactly would you calculate a solution when Staff Sergeant Shun, with 5 years of combat experience, says the conditions are beyond calculation?" Elena moved closer to the map table, her mind organizing the explanation even as she spoke. "At 4,000 meters, you can't use standard ballistic tables because they don't account for the specific environmental variables in real time. You need to build a custom solution that factors every measurable condition at both firing position and target location. Wind speed and direction at multiple altitudes, temperature at different elevations, barometric pressure differential, even minute factors like the Magnus effect on bullet spin. That's a lot of variables, Corporal," Ashford said, her tone not dismissive but genuinely curious. "Yes, ma'am, but they're all measurable and calculable. The math is complex but consistent. If you know the baseline ballistic coefficient of your ammunition, the exact distance, and you can measure the environmental conditions accurately, you can build a firing solution that accounts for everything." Brennan's voice cut through the radio, having heard the exchange through the open channel. "With all due respect, sir, Corporal Voss has never made a combat shot. She's been on base for less than a week. This is not the time to test theories." Elena felt the dismissal like a physical blow, but Hollister held up a hand for silence. "Corporal, if you were in that high position right now, with those conditions, could you make that shot?" The honest answer was complicated. Elena had never shot at 4,000 meters. Her longest confirmed hit was 1,200 meters on a California range with perfect conditions. But she'd studied extreme range, shooting obsessively, had run thousands of calculations, understood the physics and mathematics better than anyone she'd ever met. The question wasn't whether she had experience. The question was whether she had the skill. "I believe I could, sir," she said. "Given accurate environmental data and proper equipment, I could build a solution that would put the round on target." "Believing you can and actually doing it are very different things," Hollister said. "Yes, sir, but Staff Sergeant Shin already said he can't do it. So the choice is between a 0% chance if we don't try and whatever percentage chance I represent." The logic was undeniable, even if the situation was impossible. Hollister looked at Ashford, who gave the slightest shrug, then at the laptop screen, where Kazemi's heat signature continued moving in the courtyard. 30 minutes, maybe less. "Overwatch 2, this is TOC Actual," Hollister said into the microphone. "What's your ammunition count?" "Sir, we have 40 rounds remaining," Brennan replied. "And how many rounds have you expended attempting to calculate the solution at that distance?" Shin answered this time. 7 rounds, sir. None closer than 4 meters to target." Hollister made his decision with the efficiency of a commander who understood that hesitation killed as surely as enemy fire. "Overwatch 2, I'm sending Corporal Voss to your position with a helicopter extract. She'll have one opportunity to calculate and execute a shot. If she fails, you extract immediately. If she succeeds, you extract immediately. Either way, this operation concludes within the hour." The silence on the radio stretched for 3 seconds that felt like an eternity. Then Brennan's voice came back, professionally neutral despite what Elena knew had to be significant reservations. "Understood, sir. We'll prepare for her arrival." Hollister turned to Elena, his expression serious. "Corporal, you just volunteered yourself for a nearly impossible shot in combat conditions you've never experienced. If you fail, a high-value target escapes, and you'll carry that with you. If you succeed, you'll have done something maybe a dozen snipers in the world could do. Either way, your career will be defined by the next hour. Are you certain about this?" Elena thought about every moment that had led to this point. The countless hours on ranges, the mathematics that sang in her mind like music, the quiet certainty that she could do things others couldn't. She thought about all the soldiers Kazemi had killed with his IEDs, and all the ones he'd kill in the future if he walked away from that courtyard. "I'm certain, sir." "Then get your gear and get to the flight line. You have 10 minutes." Elena ran from the TOC, her boots pounding across the gravel. She reached Building 3 in under a minute, grabbed her rifle case, her rangefinder, her environmental meters, everything she'd need. Other Marines watched her sprint past, sensing the urgency but not understanding its source. She made it to the flight line in 8 minutes, where a Bell UH-1Y Venom sat with rotors already spinning, the crew chief waving her aboard. As the helicopter lifted off, banking toward the mountains where Brennan's team waited, Elena felt the magnitude of what she'd just committed to settle over her. For 1,000 meters, combat condition, one shot, everything she'd worked for, everything she believed about her own abilities, about to be tested in the most unforgiving crucible imaginable. She checked her rifle one more time, confirmed her rangefinder was functioning, and began running preliminary calculations in her mind. The numbers flowed like a river, building the foundation of a solution she'd have to perfect in minutes rather than hours. Through the helicopter's open door, she could see the Dashdak Valley approaching, rugged and beautiful and utterly indifferent to the drama about to unfold on its ridgelines. Somewhere in that vastness, a target waited, unaware that a 20-year-old corporal with more mathematics than experience was coming to attempt the impossible. The helicopter descended toward a rocky plateau 300 meters from the observation post, the pilot keeping the aircraft low to avoid detection from the valley below. Elena jumped out before the skids fully touched ground, her rifle case gripped tight and her pack heavy with equipment. The rotor wash kicked up dust that stung her eyes, and then the Venom was lifting away, banking hard to clear the ridgeline and disappear back toward the base. Silence rushed in to fill the space the helicopter had occupied, broken only by the wind and the distant echo of the rotors fading. Elena scanned the terrain, spotted movement between two large boulders 50 meters upslope, and began moving toward it. Her boots found purchase on loose scree, each step deliberate to avoid noise that might carry down into the valley. Ibarra appeared from behind cover, his face streaked with camouflage paint and his expression unreadable. He gestured for her to follow, and she moved quickly behind him through a narrow passage between rocks. The observation post was a natural formation that provided excellent cover and a clear view down into the valley, the kind of position experienced snipers dreamed of finding. Brennan waited inside, along with Chun and the security element. His jaw was tight, his eyes hard as Elena approached. In a confined space, she could feel the tension radiating from him like heat. "Corporal," he said, his voice low and controlled. "The captain gave you an order, and I'll follow it. But understand something. That target down there has killed dozens of our people. If you miss because you overestimated your abilities, those deaths are on you too. Every Marine he kills in the future, you'll carry that." Elena met his gaze steadily. "I understand, Gunnery Sergeant. I hope you do." He gestured toward the front of the hide, where Chin's rifle was set up on a bipod. "You have maybe 20 minutes before Kazemi finishes his meeting and goes back inside. Chin will walk you through what we've observed. Ibarra will spot for you. I'll verify range and environmental data. This is not a training exercise. This is not a second chance situation. You get one shot, and then we extract whether you hit or miss." "Yes, Gunnery Sergeant." Chin moved aside to let Elena take position behind his rifle, though she be using her own weapon. The view through the gap in the rocks was breathtaking and terrifying. The valley spread below like a topographic map come to life, all browns and tans with scattered vegetation. The compound sat in the middle distance, impossibly far away, a collection of mud brick buildings around a central courtyard where tiny figures moved like ants. Chin knelt beside her, his earlier uncertainty replaced with professional focus. Target is the male in traditional dress, dark brown Pakal hat, standing near the center of the courtyard. 5 other males around him in a semicircle. We've ranged the distance at 4,180 meters. Give or take 20 meters depending on exact positioning. Elena pulled out her rangefinder and took her own measurement, wanting independent confirmation. The laser returned a reading of 4,193 meters, close enough to Chin's estimate that the difference was negligible. Wind? She asked. Variable, Ibarra said, taking position beside her with the spotting scope. Down in the valley, we're reading southwest at 12 to 15 knots. But there's at least 3 different wind layers between here and target. Mid-altitude winds are stronger, probably 18 to 20 knots from the west. High-altitude winds are anybody's guess. Elena pulled out her Kestrel weather meter and began taking readings. Temperature 91 degrees at their position. Humidity 23%. Barometric pressure 29.65 inches. She looked down at the valley floor, which shimmered with heat distortion, and estimated the temperature differential at 15 to 18 degrees warmer than their elevation. What ammunition are you using? She asked Chun. Federal Premium Gold Medal, 175 grain Sierra Match King, he replied. Same as you train with. Elena nodded, her mind already building the calculation framework. The Sierra Match King had a ballistic coefficient of 0.496 using the G1 drag model. Muzzle velocity of approximately 2,540 feet per second from Chen's rifle based on barrel length and ambient conditions. At 4,190 meters, the bullet would be in flight for approximately 4.8 seconds. In that time, gravity would pull it down roughly 280 feet from bore line. Wind would push it laterally. Temperature and air density would affect drag. The Coriolis effect from Earth's rotation would drift the bullet several inches. Spin drift from the rifling would add another few inches. Every single variable had to be calculated and accounted for. One mistake, one miscalculation, and the bullet could miss by meters. She pulled out her notebook and began working through the math, writing numbers in tight, precise columns. Brennan watched over her shoulder, silent but present, his skepticism a palpable weight. Ibarra called out mirage readings from the spotting scope, giving her additional data about wind behavior at different distances. The wind is gusting, Ibarra said. I'm seeing 15, not sustained with gusts to 22. Direction varying from southwest to west-southwest. It's not consistent. Elena factored that into her calculations, building a solution that accounted for the highest probability wind conditions while acknowledging the uncertainty. At this distance, a 5-knot wind variation would shift the impact point by almost 3 feet. She couldn't eliminate that margin of error, but she could minimize it by choosing the right moment to shoot, waiting for a lull in the gusting pattern. Temperature gradient between positions, she said, still writing. Estimated 17 degrees. That's going to reduce air density in the valley, decrease drag, flatten trajectory by approximately 6 inches compared to standard tables. 6 inches at 4,000 meters is nothing, Brennan said. Your margin of error is measured in feet, not inches. Every inch matters, Gunnery Sergeant, Elena replied without looking up. 6 inches of vertical shift could be the difference between a center mass hit and a miss low. At this distance, you can't afford to ignore any factor. She continued calculating, filling pages with numbers and formulas. Ibarra and Chan exchanged glances, clearly impressed by the speed and confidence with which she worked. Brennan remained stone-faced, arms crossed, waiting. After 8 minutes of intense calculation, Elena set down her pen. Okay, she said. I have a solution. Walk me through it, Brennan ordered. Elena took a breath and began explaining. Base distance, 4,190 meters. Bullet drop compensation, 278 feet, which translates to 412 mils elevation adjustment from 100 meter zero. Wind drift calculation based on 15 knots southwest wind gives me 118 inches right to left push, requiring 34 mils left windage correction. Temperature and air density adjustment adds 3 mils elevation. Coriolis effect at this latitude and distance adds 2.3 mils right correction. Spin drift adds 1.1 mils right. Total firing solution is 415 mils up, 31.6 mils left from mechanical zero. Brennan stared at her. You calculated Coriolis effect in your head? It's just trigonometry, Gunnery Sergeant. Latitude times distance times a constant. The math isn't complicated once you know the formula. Ibarra was nodding slowly, running the calculations against his own knowledge. Her numbers track, Gunny. I can't verify every detail without a ballistic computer, but the major factors all make sense. Making sense and being right are different things, Brennan said. But his tone had shifted slightly, professional respect creeping in despite his reservations. Elena began setting up her rifle, adjusting the scope turrets to match her calculated solution. Each click of the turret represented a precise angular change, and she counted carefully, her focus absolute. Shin offered tips about his rifle's specific characteristics, small details about how the trigger broke, and where the harmonics affected barrel vibration. She absorbed it all, integrating the information into her mental model. When her rifle was set up, when the scope was adjusted and the bipod positioned and her shooting mat arranged, Elena settled in behind the weapon and looked through the optic. The target was a tiny figure in the crosshairs, barely recognizable as human at this distance. Kazemi was still talking, gesturing to the men around him, completely unaware that 4,000 meters away a Marine corporal was calculating the mathematics of his death. Target is still in position, Ibarra confirmed, his eye to the spotting scope. You have maybe 5 minutes before the meeting breaks up. Elena controlled her breathing, feeling her heartbeat slow into the steady rhythm she'd practiced thousands of times. For 0.8 seconds of bullet flight. In that time, Kazemi could move, the wind could gust, any number of variables could change. She'd done everything possible to account for the knowns. Now she had to trust her calculations and accept that some things remained beyond prediction. Ready when you are, Corporal, Brennan said quietly. And despite everything, despite his skepticism and his initial dismissal, his voice carried a note of respect. She'd earned that much at least. Elena's finger moved to the trigger, taking up the slack, finding that perfect point of tension just before the break. The wind was steady, the conditions as good as they'd likely get. Mathematics and instinct aligned in a single moment of perfect clarity. It was time to find out if 21 years old was old enough, after all. Elena's world narrowed to the reticle in her scope and the distant figure of Rashid Kazemi standing in that courtyard. Her breathing had slowed to the deep rhythm she'd practiced until it became automatic, each exhale lasting 6 seconds, each inhale controlled and measured. Her heart beat steady at 52 beats per minute, the athletic efficiency of someone who'd trained their body for moments like this. The wind flag she'd improvised from a strip of cloth tied to a rock showed the breeze holding steady at the observation post. Down in the valley, heat shimmer distorted the air, but she could see the pattern in it, read the way the mirage bent and flowed. Southwest wind, maybe 14 knots, consistent enough for the next 30 seconds. Windage is good, Ibarra said quietly beside her, his voice barely above a whisper. Mirage shows stable conditions. Target is stationary. Elena's finger rested on the trigger, the cool metal familiar against her skin. She'd fired this rifle thousands of times, knew its exact trigger pull weight of 3 pounds 2 ounces, understood the precise moment when the sear would release and the firing pin would strike the primer. But she'd never fired it in combat, never taken a shot where another human being's life hung in the balance of her calculations. The moral weight of that moment pressed against her consciousness, but she pushed it aside. Kazemi had killed American soldiers, would kill more if he walked away. This wasn't murder. This was the mathematics of war, the cold equation that said some deaths prevented greater deaths. She didn't have to like it, but she had to accept it. Send it, Brennan said, his voice carrying quiet authority. Elena began her final trigger press, smooth and steady. No jerking or anticipation. The world seemed to slow down, each millisecond stretching into clarity. She was aware of everything. The temperature of the air, the texture of the rock beneath her, the weight of her body armor, the distant sound of wind moving through the valley. The rifle fired. The suppressor reduced the sound to a sharp crack rather than an explosive boom, but the recoil drove back against her shoulder with familiar force. Through the scope, she watched the crosshair lift slightly from the recoil impulse, then settle back as the rifle returned to battery. But the bullet was already gone, already screaming downrange at 2,540 feet per second, already beginning its long parabolic arc toward a target she could barely see. For 0.8 seconds of flight time. Good break, Chun said, having watched her trigger technique. No flinch, no anticipation. Elena worked the bolt smoothly, ejecting the spent casing and chambering a fresh round in case a follow-up shot was needed. Then she settled back behind the scope, watching, waiting, counting the seconds in her mind with the precision of someone who understood that time itself was just another variable to be calculated. 1 second. The bullet had traveled 2,500 feet, was already a quarter-mile downrange, had dropped 18 feet from boreline. 2 seconds. 5,000 feet now, half a mile out, falling through different layers of air with different temperatures and wind speeds, each one pushing and pulling at the small piece of copper and lead. 3 seconds. 3/4 of a mile. The bullet had slowed from supersonic to transonic velocity, that critical transition point where drag characteristics changed and calculations became more complex. Elena had accounted for it in her solution, but theory and reality didn't always align perfectly. For seconds, a full mile now, the bullet arcing through the highest point of its trajectory before beginning the final descent. Wind drift had pushed it nearly 10 feet left of boreline, exactly as her calculations had predicted it should. I can't see the trace, Ibarra said, his eye glued to the spotting scope. Distances too great, conditions too hazy. Elena knew that was possible. At this range, with this much heat shimmer and atmospheric distortion, visually tracking the bullet was nearly impossible even with the best optics. They'd have to wait for the impact, have to trust that 4.8 seconds of mathematical prediction would prove accurate in the chaos of reality. For 0.6 seconds, for 0.7 seconds, the bullet reached its target. Through her scope, Elena saw Kazemi's head snap back violently. His body crumpled, dropping straight down as if someone had cut his strings. The men around him scattered in confusion, some diving for cover, others freezing in shock, none of them understanding what had just happened because the sound of the shot hadn't reached them yet and wouldn't for another 8 seconds. "Hit," Ibarra called, his voice sharp with excitement and disbelief. "Confirmed hit, center mass. Target is down." "Holy Christ," Chun whispered. She actually made the shot. Elena worked the bolt again, kept her eye to the scope, professional discipline overriding the surge of adrenaline that wanted to flood through her system. In the courtyard below, Kazemi's body lay motionless while his associates began to react, pulling weapons, shouting orders, searching for a threat they couldn't identify because the shooter was nearly 3 miles away and completely invisible from their position. "Target confirmed, Kia," Ibarra continued, his spotter training taking over as he called the shot details. "Impact approximately 2 inches left of center, head, and upper torso area. Distance 4,193 meters. Wind southwest at 14 knots. Temperature differential 17 degrees. Shot time 14:32 local." Brennan had his radio out, keying the transmission. "TOC, this is Overwatch 2. Target is neutralized. I repeat, target is neutralized. Kazemi is down. Confirmed kill." The response came back immediately, Captain Hollister's voice carrying barely controlled excitement. "Overwatch 2. Confirmed Corporal Voss made the shot?" "Affirmative, sir," Brennan said, and Elena heard something in his voice she hadn't heard before. Respect, genuine and unstinting. Corporal Voss engaged target at 4,193 meters with a single round. Target eliminated. "It was a perfect shot, sir." "Outstanding," Hollister replied. "Extract immediately. We'll have celebration when you return." Brennan looked at Elena, and for the first time since she'd arrived at FOB Rhino, she saw him truly see her. Not as a boot, not as a liability, not as a kid playing soldier. As a Marine sniper who'd just done something extraordinary. "Roger that, sir." Overwatch 2 out. The team began breaking down their position with practiced efficiency, packing gear, and preparing for extraction. But Brennan held up a hand, stopping the activity for a moment. He turned to Elena, his expression serious. "Corporal Voss," he said formally, "that was one of the finest shots I've seen in 15 years of military service. Your calculations were perfect, your execution was flawless, and you just eliminated a target that's been killing our people for months. I owe you an apology for doubting your abilities." Elena felt emotion threatening to overwhelm her professional composure, but she held it together. "Thank you, Gunnery Sergeant. I was just doing my job." "No," Brennan said firmly. "You did far more than your job. You did something most snipers in the world couldn't do." He held out his hand, offering a handshake between equals rather than superior to subordinate. She took his hand, felt the firm grip that acknowledged her as a fellow warrior. The other Marines gathered around, Chin clapping her on the shoulder, Torres grinning widely, even the security element Marines offering quiet congratulations. In that moment, on that rocky Afghan ridgeline 4,000 meters from where Rashid Kazemi's body was being discovered, Elena Vos stopped being the boot and became part of the team. "All right, Marines, let's move," Brennan ordered, returning to tactical mode. "We've got a 300-meter hump to the extract point, and I want to be gone before anyone in that compound figures out where the shot came from." They moved quickly through the rocks, Elena carrying her rifle with the same confidence the others carried theirs. The helicopter was already inbound, its rotors audible in the distance. As they reached the landing zone and waited for pickup, Elena allowed herself one moment to process what had just happened. For 1,193 meters, for 0.8 seconds of bullet flight, one shot, one kill, every calculation perfect, every variable accounted for, mathematics and reality aligning in a single moment of absolute precision. She'd proven something today, not just to Brennan and his team, but to herself. Age didn't matter. Experience helped, but it wasn't everything. What mattered was skill, knowledge, and the courage to trust both when the stakes were highest. The venom came in fast and low, flaring to land on the rocky plateau. The team boarded quickly, Elena taking a seat near the door as the helicopter lifted off and banked away from the valley. Through the open door, she could see the compound far below, tiny figures still moving around the courtyard where Kazemi had fallen. She'd changed something today, changed how Brennan saw her, how the team saw her, how she saw herself. But more importantly, she'd saved lives. Every soldier Kazemi would have killed with his IEDs, every Marine who would have died in his ambushes, they'd all live now because of her shot. The mathematics of war were brutal and final, but sometimes they added up to something that mattered. As the helicopter carried them back toward FOB Rhino, Elena cleaned her rifle with steady hands, already thinking about the next mission, the next calculation, the next impossible shot someone would say she was too young to make. The helicopter touched down at FOB Rhino just after 1,600 hours, and Elena could see that word had already spread across the base. Marines had gathered near the flight line, more than would normally pay attention to a routine patrol return. As the Venom's rotors spun down and the team disembarked, Captain Hollister was there waiting with Lieutenant Ashford and several other officers Elena didn't recognize. Hollister walked directly to her, ignoring protocol about chain of command and rank structure. "Corporal Voss," he said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "On behalf of every Marine on this base and every soldier you just saved from Kazemi's future attacks, thank you. That was extraordinary marksmanship." "Just doing my job, sir," Elena replied, feeling dozens of eyes on her. Hollister smiled. "When your job involves making a shot that maybe 10 people in the world could make, you get to accept the recognition." He turned to address the gathered Marines. "Corporal Voss just eliminated a high-value target at a distance of 4,193 meters. That's 2.6 miles for those keeping track. One shot, one kill, perfect execution under combat conditions." The Marines erupted in applause and shouts of approval. Elena felt her face flush and used to this kind of attention, but she maintained her composure. Beside her, Brennan stood with his arms crossed, but there was a slight smile on his weathered face. He caught her eye and gave her a single nod of respect that meant more than all the cheering. Lieutenant Ashford approached next, her expression somewhere between impressed and vindicated. "I told you," she said quietly so only Elena could hear. "Sometimes the best tool for the job isn't the one with the most miles on it. Yes, Mom, Elena repeated. You were right. The crowd began to disperse, Marines returning to their duties, but still talking animatedly about the shot. Elena could hear fragments of conversation, numbers being repeated and debated, speculation about how such a distance was even possible. The story was already taking on a life of its own, growing and mutating as stories did in military circles. Brennan gathered his sniper section in Building 3 for a debrief. The atmosphere had completely changed from when Elena first arrived less than a week ago. Then she'd been an unwelcome intrusion, a liability to be managed. Now the other snipers made space for her at the table, included her naturally in the conversation, treated her as one of their own. All right, let's break down the mission, Brennan said, pulling out his notebook. Chun, walk us through the initial observation phase. For the next hour, they conducted a thorough after-action review, analyzing every decision and action from insertion to extraction. When they reached Elena's shot, Brennan had her explain her calculations in detail, and the other snipers listened with genuine interest. Chin asked questions about her wind reading technique. Ibarra wanted to understand her method for calculating temperature gradient effects. Even Torres, who'd barely spoken to her before, was engaged and attentive. The temperature differential calculation is what most people miss at extreme range, Elena explained, using a whiteboard to illustrate her point. Standard ballistic tables assume consistent air density, but in reality the valley floor was 17 degrees hotter than our position. That changes the air density significantly, which affects drag, which flattens the trajectory. If you don't account for it, you'll shoot high every time. How did you learn to calculate that in the field? Chin asked. That's not standard Scout sniper school curriculum. Elena shrugged. I studied extreme long-range shooting as a hobby before I enlisted. Read every book and article I could find, watched videos from top-tier precision rifle competitors, learned the physics and mathematics behind it. When you understand the underlying principles, the calculations become intuitive. Brennan leaned back in his chair, studying her. I've been doing this for 15 years, and I'm still learning. You've been in the Corps for 3 years, and you're teaching me things. That's humbling. Experience matters, Gunnery Sergeant Elena said. I have the theory, but you have the instincts that come from doing this under pressure for over a decade. Ideally, you need both. Well, now you've got combat experience too, Brennan said, and at a level most snipers will never achieve. That 4,000-meter shot is going to follow you for your entire career. The debrief concluded with assignments for the next day. But instead of relegating Elena to guard duty and equipment maintenance, Brennan integrated her into the operational rotation. She was officially part of the sniper section now, a shooter rather than just an assistant. As the meeting broke up, Brennan pulled her aside. Voss, I need to say something, and I want you to hear it clearly. When you arrived here, I saw a kid. I saw someone who looked like they should be in high school, not in combat. I let that bias cloud my judgment about your capabilities, and that was wrong. You proved today that age and appearance mean nothing compared to skill and intelligence. I understand why you were cautious, Gunnery Sergeant, Elena said. You've lost people before. You were protecting your team. That's true, but it doesn't excuse dismissing you without giving you a fair chance. Brennan's expression was serious, almost solemn. In this job, we can't afford to judge people on anything except their abilities. You're one of the finest natural snipers I've encountered, and I should have recognized that sooner. I'm recommending you for a Bronze Star with V device for valor. That shot saved American lives and eliminated a significant threat. You deserve recognition for it. Elena felt the weight of that statement. A Bronze Star was a serious commendation, one that would mark her entire military career. Thank you, Gunnery Sergeant. That means a great deal coming from you. You earned it, Corporal. Now let's make sure you keep developing those skills. Tomorrow we're running a training evolution at the range. I want you instructing the other snipers on your environmental calculation techniques. The next morning, Elena found herself in an unfamiliar position, standing in front of experienced combat veterans, teaching them methods she developed through obsessive study and natural mathematical aptitude. Chun, Ibarra, Torres, even Brennan himself, all of them taking notes as she explained her systematic approach to reading environmental conditions and building firing solutions. The key is treating every variable as measurable rather than estimable, she explained, drawing diagrams on the whiteboard. Most snipers use general approximations for things like temperature gradient or air density changes. But with modern tools like the Kestrel, you can measure those factors precisely at your location, then use physics to extrapolate conditions at the target location. What about factors you can't measure directly? Ibarra asked. Like wind speed at mid-altitude between shooter and target? You use indicators, Elena replied. Mirage patterns, dust movement, vegetation movement at various distances. Each one gives you data about wind conditions at that specific altitude and location. You're essentially building a three-dimensional model of the atmosphere between you and your target, then calculating how your bullet will interact with each layer. The training session ran for 3 hours, and by the end, every sniper in the section had improved their environmental reading skills. Brennan watched it all with quiet satisfaction, seeing his team become more capable through Elena's instruction. Over the following days, Elena settled into the rhythm of operational deployment. She pulled missions with different team members, stood observation post rotations, conducted reconnaissance patrols. The other Marines on base treated her differently now, with a respect that had nothing to do with courtesy and everything to do with proven competence. When she walked through the chow hall or across the compound, conversations would pause and heads would turn. She was the sniper who'd made the impossible shot, and that reputation preceded her everywhere. But Elena tried not to let it change her. She remained focused on the job, dedicated to continuous improvement, and humble about her abilities despite the recognition. Every morning she was at the range before anyone else, practicing, calculating, refining her skills. Every evening she studied after her duties were complete, reading ballistic data and meteorological reports, always learning. On the 5th day after the Kazemi shot, Lieutenant Ashford found her cleaning her rifle in Building 3. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. "Of course not, ma'am," Elena replied, making space at the table. Ashford sat down, watching Elena's methodical disassembly and cleaning process. "I wanted to let you know that your shot has had effects beyond just eliminating Kazemi. Intelligence indicates significant disruption in Taliban command structure in this province. 3 regional commanders have left the area, apparently concerned they might be next. IED emplacement has dropped 40% in the past week." Elena paused in her cleaning. "That's good to hear, ma'am. It's more than good, Corporal. It's strategically significant. One shot changed the entire security situation in this region." Ashford leaned forward slightly. "There's talk of creating a specialized long-range interdiction team, using the tactics you demonstrated. Extreme distance precision fire against high-value targets. They're calling it Operation Longshot." Elena looked up sharply. "They want to replicate what happened? They want to institutionalize it," Ashford said. "Turn your approach into doctrine. Brennan would lead the team, but you'd be the primary instructor for methodology and technique. It would mean extending your deployment, additional training responsibilities, and putting you in position to shape how the Marine Corps approaches extreme-range shooting." The magnitude of that possibility settled over Elena. She'd come to Afghanistan expecting to prove herself capable. Instead, she'd proven something that might change an entire aspect of military operations. "When do they need an answer, ma'am?" Ashford smiled. "You've got time to think about it. But between you and me, Corporal, I think you just found your calling. Some Marines are riflemen. Some are leaders. You're a revolutionary. Someone who's going to change how we think about what's possible." As Lieutenant Ashford left, Elena returned to cleaning her rifle, but her mind was elsewhere. For 1,193 meters had seemed like the challenge of a lifetime. Now it felt like just the beginning. 3 weeks after the Kazemi shot, Elena had become an integral part of FOB Rhino's operational tempo. She ran missions with Brennan's team, instructed other snipers in advanced environmental calculation techniques, and had earned a reputation that extended far beyond their small base. Word of the 4,000-meter kill had spread through military networks, and she'd fielded questions from snipers at other bases asking about her methodology. But with recognition came new challenges. Captain Hollister had approved the Operation Longshot concept, and planning was underway to create a specialized extreme-range interdiction capability. That meant Elena's role was evolving from sniper to instructor to tactical innovator, and the pressure of those expectations weighed heavily. She sat in the TOC on a Thursday morning, reviewing intelligence reports with Lieutenant Ashford. The lieutenant had become something of a mentor, helping Elena navigate the complexities of military bureaucracy and strategic planning. Together, they were developing protocols for identifying targets suitable for extreme-range engagement and calculating the risk-benefit analysis for each potential operation. The challenge with Operation Longshot, Ashford explained, pointing to a map marked with potential observation positions, is that we're pushing the boundaries of what's tactically feasible. Every shot over 3,000 meters requires perfect conditions, extensive preparation, and assumes the target remains stationary long enough to engage. Those variables don't align often. Elena studied the map, her analytical mind processing the terrain features and potential firing solutions. What if we approach it differently? Instead of waiting for perfect conditions, what if we create them? Ashford raised an eyebrow. Explain. Elena pulled the map closer, tracing lines between observation points and target areas. Most long-range operations fail because we're reactive. We find a target, try to engage, and environmental conditions or target movement prevent success. But if we identify high-probability target locations in advance, preposition teams at ideal observation points, and wait for targets to come to us, we control more variables. Proactive rather than reactive, Ashford said thoughtfully. Set the trap instead of chasing the prey. Exactly. Elena was warming to the concept now, seeing the tactical possibilities unfold. We know from intelligence which compounds are used for Taliban leadership meetings. We know which travel routes they prefer. If we position long-range teams at permanent observation posts overlooking those key locations, we're ready when opportunities present themselves. The door opened and Brennan entered, followed by Chun and Ibarra. The gunnery sergeant looked tired, the kind of exhaustion that came from too many missions and not enough sleep, but his eyes were alert as always. Captain wants us in the briefing room in 10 minutes, he said. New intelligence on a high-value target. The briefing room filled quickly with the sniper section and key operations staff. Captain Hollister stood at the front with a grim expression that suggested the news wasn't good. Gentlemen, Corporal Voss, we have a situation developing that requires immediate action. Intelligence has located Mahmoud Tehrani, a senior Taliban financier responsible for funding operations across 3 provinces. A new photograph appeared on the screen, showing a lean man in expensive traditional dress with calculating eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. Tehrani had been on target lists for months, but proved extremely elusive, changing locations frequently and maintaining sophisticated security protocols. The problem, Hollister continued, is that Tehrani is currently at a compound in the Tagab Valley, and our window to engage him is extremely narrow. He's meeting with local commanders today only, and by tomorrow he'll be gone. The distance from feasible observation points to the compound is 4,800 meters. The room went silent. 4,800 meters was beyond extreme. It was nearly 3 miles, a distance where even calculating a theoretical firing solution became extraordinarily complex. Elena felt every eye in the room turn toward her, expectations pressing down like physical weight. 4,800 meters is at the very edge of what's possible with our current equipment, Brennan said carefully. The M48-5 can reach that distance, but accuracy becomes more theoretical than practical. Corporal Voss, Hollister said, looking directly at her. You've demonstrated capabilities beyond what we thought possible. Can you make a shot at that distance? Elena considered the question seriously, running calculations in her mind. 4,800 meters meant 6 seconds of bullet flight time. Wind drift will be measured in yards, not feet. Temperature gradients, air density changes, Coriolis effect, spin drift, all of it would be magnified exponentially. The margin of error would be enormous, the probability of success questionable at best. Sir, I can calculate a firing solution for that distance, she said slowly. But there are too many variables I can't control. Wind changes during 6 seconds of flight time could push the bullet several meters off target. If Kazemi at 4,100 meters was at the edge of reliable engagement, 4,800 is beyond it. So you're saying it's impossible? Hollister asked. I'm saying it's low probability, sir. Maybe 20% chance of success, even under ideal conditions. You'd be better served finding a way to reduce the distance or waiting for a better opportunity. We don't have better opportunities, Lieutenant Ashford interjected. Tehrani has evaded us for 8 months. This is the first time we've had confirmed location and a possible firing position. If we don't act now, he continues funding operations that kill our people. The weight of that reality hung in the air. Elena understood the pressure to take action, the desire to eliminate a target that represented a significant threat. But she also understood the mathematics, and the mathematics said 4,800 meters was beyond reliable capability. Gunnery Sergeant Brennan, what's your assessment? Hollister asked. Brennan glanced at Elena before responding. Sir, I trust Corporal Voss's judgment on this. She's proven her ability to calculate these solutions better than anyone I've worked with. If she says 20% probability, I believe her. The question is whether a 20% chance is worth the risk of alerting the target if we miss. How long would you need to prepare for the shot? Hollister asked Elena. Assuming we can reach the observation point by nightfall, I need until dawn to gather environmental data and build the solution. That gives me roughly 8 hours of preparation time. And if conditions are favorable, if wind is stable and temperature gradients are minimal, Elena considered that scenario. If everything aligns perfectly, if the conditions are as good as they can possibly be, maybe 40% probability. But that's best case, sir. Captain Hollister looked at the photograph of Tehrani on the screen, then back to Elena. Corporal, I'm not going to order you to take a shot you don't believe in, but I'm going to ask you to try. Position yourself at that observation point. Gather your data, build your solution. If dawn comes and you believe you have a reasonable chance of success, take the shot. If the conditions aren't right, we extract and wait for another opportunity. Your judgment call. The responsibility of that decision settled over Elena like a heavy blanket. Hollister was giving her tactical authority to decide whether to engage a high-value target, trusting her assessment over everyone else's opinion. It was extraordinary confidence in someone so junior, but also meant the consequences of failure would rest entirely on her shoulders. Understood, sir, Elena said. I'll need Ibarra as spotter and Chun for security. If we're going to attempt this, I want the most experienced team possible. You've got them, Hollister confirmed. Wheels up in 2 hours. Mission brief in 30 minutes. Dismissed. As the room emptied, Brennan pulled Elena aside. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. Saying no to a low-probability shot isn't weakness. It's good judgment. I know, Gunnery Sergeant. But if there's any chance to take Tehrani off the board, I have to try. Brennan studied her face, seeing something there that satisfied him. Just remember, you've already proven yourself. You don't have to keep pushing the limits to maintain respect. This isn't about respect, Elena replied. It's about doing the job. Tehrani funds the operations that kill Marines. If I can stop that, I will. He nodded slowly. All right then, let's go make the impossible happen again. Elena returned to Building 3 and began preparing her equipment with meticulous care. 4,800 meters, nearly 3 miles. A shot that would require everything she'd learned, every calculation perfected, and a significant measure of luck she couldn't control. But as she cleaned her rifle and organized her gear, she felt the familiar calm settling over her. Numbers didn't lie. Physics was consistent. If she could measure the variables accurately and build a perfect solution, mathematics would do the rest. Chun appeared in the doorway. You ready for this, Voss? Ready as I'll ever be, she replied. You ever think when you woke up this morning that you'd be attempting a 3-meal shot by tomorrow? Can't say that I did, Chun admitted with a slight smile. But then again, I never thought I'd see someone make a 4,100-meter kill either. You've got a habit of making the impossible look routine. Let's hope that habit holds, Elena said, closing her rifle case. because 4,800 meters is a long way to miss. As the sun set over FOB Rhino and the mission team prepared to deploy, Elena ran through calculations one more time in her mind. 6 seconds of bullet flight. Hundreds of variables to account for. One shot at a target responsible for dozens of American deaths. The mathematics were brutal and unforgiving. But so was war, and Elena Vos had proven she understood both. The night insertion went smoothly, vehicles rolling through darkness with night vision equipment, turning the landscape into shades of green. Elena sat in the back of the MRAP with her rifle case between her knees, mentally reviewing the ballistic calculations she'd need to perform once they reached the observation point. Ibarra sat across from her, checking his spotting scope, while Chun maintained security watch through the vehicle's gun port. They reached the drop-off point at 22:30 hours and began the 2-kilometer foot patrol to the ridgeline overlooking Taga Valley. The terrain was rough, all loose rock and steep inclines, and Elena felt the weight of her equipment with every step. But she maintained the pace, keeping up with the more experienced Marines without complaint. The observation point was a natural formation of boulders that provided excellent concealment and a clear view down into the valley. As they settled into position, Elena could see the compound far below, tiny lights marking its location in the darkness. 4,800 meters. The distance seemed incomprehensible, more like an abstract concept than an actual shooting problem. Ibarra set up his spotting scope while Elena unpacked her environmental monitoring equipment. The night air was cool, maybe 65 degrees, but she knew that would change dramatically once the sun rose. Temperature swings in this region could reach 40 degrees between night and day, and that differential would be critical to her calculations. Current conditions, she said quietly, reading her Kestrel. Temperature 63 degrees, barometric pressure 29.72, humidity 41%, wind northeast at 6 knots. Ibarra made notes in his data book. Valley floor temperature estimate. Elena used her thermal scope to scan the lower elevations. Based on thermal signature, I'd estimate 72 degrees down there. 9-degree gradient currently, but that'll change significantly after sunrise. They settled in for the long watch, taking turns on observation while maintaining constant environmental monitoring. Elena recorded data every 30 minutes, building a picture of how conditions changed through the night. Wind patterns shifted from northeast to east, then back to northeast. Temperature continued to drop until 0300, then slowly began rising as dawn approached. Chun maintained security, scanning the surrounding terrain for any threats. They were far from friendly forces deep in terrain the Taliban considered their own. If they were discovered, extraction would be complicated and dangerous. But that was the nature of sniper operations. Position yourself where the enemy doesn't expect you, take the shot, and disappear before anyone understands what happened. As the first hints of dawn colored the eastern sky, Elena began her final calculations. She'd gathered 8 hours of environmental data, understood the pattern of wind behavior in this valley, had measured temperature gradients at different elevations. Now, she had to synthesize all of it into a single firing solution that would send a bullet accurately across nearly 3 miles. The mathematics were staggering. At 4,800 meters, the bullet would drop approximately 460 feet from bore line, requiring over 600 mils of elevation adjustment. Wind drift, assuming a moderate 10-knot crosswind, would push the bullet nearly 20 feet laterally. Temperature gradient between firing position and target would affect air density and therefore drag coefficient. Coriolis effect would drift the bullet several inches. Spin drift would add more. And all of these factors would interact in complex ways during the 6 seconds of flight time. She filled pages in her notebook with calculations, checking and rechecking each variable. Ibarra watched over her shoulder, following her methodology and occasionally suggesting considerations she'd already accounted for. The sky gradually lightened, revealing the full scope of the valley below and the impossible distance to the target compound. Target compound showing activity, Ibarra reported, his eye to the spotting scope. Multiple personnel moving in the courtyard. No positive identification on Tehrani yet. Elena continued calculating, her mind deep in the mathematics of trajectory and drag. She built 3 different solutions based on different wind scenarios, planning for contingencies. If the wind shifted during her shot preparation, she needed to be able to adjust quickly. The sun broke over the mountains at 05:43, and with it came the dramatic temperature changes Elena had been waiting to measure. Within 30 minutes, the temperature at their position had risen from 58 degrees to 71 degrees. Down in the valley, thermal imaging showed temperatures climbing even faster, already reaching 86 degrees. That's a 15-degree gradient, Elena said, making rapid adjustments to her calculations. And it's still rising. By the time we shoot, it could be 20-degree differential. How does that affect your solution? Chun asked, fascinated by the complexity of the problem. Air density decreases with temperature, which reduces drag on the bullet, which flattens trajectory, Elena explained. At this distance, a 20-degree gradient could change impact point by as much as 30 inches. If I don't account for it, I'll shoot high. Positive ID on Teherani, Ibarra said suddenly, tension in his voice. He's in the courtyard, meeting with 4 other males. This is our window. Elena felt her heart rate spike, but forced herself to remain calm. She reviewed her final calculations one more time, confirming every variable. Temperature 73 degrees at position, 89 in valley. Wind east-northeast at 8 knots sustained, gust to 12. Barometric pressure stable. Distance 4,807 meters by laser range finder. The firing solution came together in her mind like a complex puzzle where every piece finally aligned. 638 mils elevation. 41 mils left windage. Additional corrections for Coriolis, spin drift, and about a dozen other factors that each contributed small but critical adjustments. She began setting up her rifle, dialing the calculated adjustments into her scope turrets. Each click of the turret represented a precise angular change, and she counted carefully, her fingers steady despite the magnitude of what she was attempting. Ibarra provided continuous updates on target behavior. Teherani is stationary, standing near the center of the courtyard. For security personnel around him, approximately 3 meters spacing. Clear shot opportunity. Elena settled behind her rifle, the familiar weight and feel of it somehow reassuring despite the extraordinary circumstances. Through her scope, Teherani was barely visible, more of a concept than a person at this distance. She could make out a figure, could see movement, but the details were lost in 3 miles of atmospheric distortion and heat shimmer. Wind is steady at 8 knots, Ibarra called. Mirage indicates stable conditions. Temperature holding at 89 valley floor. You got a good window. Elena controlled her breathing, feeling her heart rate slow into the familiar rhythm. 6 seconds of flight time. Half a football field of bullet drop. 20 feet of wind drift. Dozens of variables all calculated and accounted for, mathematics and physics combining into a single moment of truth. But something felt wrong. She couldn't articulate it, couldn't point to a specific factor, but her instincts were screaming that conditions weren't quite right. The wind readings were good, the temperature measurements were accurate, but something in the way the Mirage moved at mid-distance suggested instability she couldn't quantify. Hold, she said quietly. What's wrong? Chun asked. I don't know. Elena kept her eye to the scope, watching the heat shimmer between her position and the target. The Mirage pattern wasn't consistent with her wind calculations. Something at mid-altitude was creating turbulence she hadn't accounted for. Target is preparing to move, Ibarra warned. If we're going to engage, it needs to be now. Elena felt the pressure of the moment crushing down. This was their only opportunity to eliminate Teherani. If he left that courtyard, the mission failed and he'd continue funding operations that killed Americans. But taking a shot she wasn't confident in could miss by meters, alert the entire compound, and eliminate any future opportunities. Give me 30 seconds, she said. She pulled out her thermal scope and scanned the air between her position and the target, looking for the temperature variations that would explain the Mirage behavior she was seeing. There, At approximately 2,500 meters distance, a layer of significantly warmer air creating a thermal boundary. Wind was moving differently above and below that boundary, creating a wind shear effect she hadn't calculated. Her mind raced through the implications. The bullet would pass through that thermal boundary at roughly 3 seconds into its flight. The wind shear would push it laterally, but the amount depended on the exact wind-speed differential between layers. She didn't have time for a complete recalculation, had to estimate based on the mirage behavior and her understanding of atmospheric physics. Adjusting windage 3 mils right, she announced, dialing the correction into her scope. Thermal boundary at mid-distance, creating wind shear effect. Target is moving toward the building, Ibarra said urgently. 10 seconds before he's inside, and we lose him. Elena's finger found the trigger. The mathematics were as perfect as she could make them in the time available. The shot was low probability, she'd said that from the beginning, but it was the only chance they had. She thought about all the Marines Teherani had killed with his funding. All the families who'd lost fathers and sons and brothers because this man provided money for IEDs and ambushes. If she could stop even one more of those deaths, the risk was worth it. Send it, Brennan's voice came over the radio. Trust your calculations. Elena began her trigger press, smooth and steady, exactly as she'd done 10,000 times in training and dozens of times in combat. The rifle fired, the suppressed crack sharp in the morning air, and the bullet began its 6-second journey across 4,807 meters of Afghan atmosphere. 6 seconds felt like an eternity. Elena kept her eye to the scope, watching through the crosshairs, even though she knew she wouldn't be able to track the bullet across that impossible distance. The heat shimmer and atmospheric distortion made visual confirmation nearly impossible. She'd have to trust the math, trust her last-second adjustment for the wind shear, trust that 6 seconds from now the bullet would arrive exactly where she'd calculated. 1 second. The bullet had traveled 800 feet, already a significant distance, but barely a fraction of the total journey. Gravity was pulling it down, wind was pushing it laterally, air resistance was slowing its velocity from supersonic to transonic speed. 2 seconds. 1,600 feet now, a quarter-mile covered. The bullet passed through the first major wind layer, the east-northeast breeze at their elevation pushing it slightly left before it descended into calmer air. 3 seconds. This was the critical moment when the bullet encountered the thermal boundary Elena had spotted at the last second. The wind shear effect would either confirm her hasty adjustment or prove it wrong. If she'd miscalculated by even a single mil, the bullet could miss by several feet. 4 seconds. A mile covered, the bullet now in the hot valley air, experiencing different drag characteristics than at higher elevation. Temperature, humidity, air density, all creating subtle forces that accumulated into significant trajectory changes over distance. 5 seconds. The bullet had slowed considerably, was now subsonic, experiencing different ballistic behavior than in the early phase of flight. Elena's calculations had accounted for this transition, but theory and reality didn't always match perfectly. 6 seconds. Impact. Through the scope, Elena saw Teherani's body jerk violently and collapse. The security personnel around him scattered, some diving for cover, others pulling weapons and scanning uselessly for a threat they couldn't possibly identify from 4,800 meters away. Hit, Ibarra called, his voice tight with controlled excitement. Target down, confirmed impact center mass. Holy Christ, Voss, you actually made that shot. Chun let out a breath he'd been holding. 4,800 meters. That's got to be some kind of record. Elena worked the bolt mechanically, chambering another round out of habit, even though a follow-up shot would be unnecessary. Her hands were steady, but inside she felt a surge of emotion she couldn't quite name. Relief, certainly. Satisfaction at solving an impossible mathematical problem, but also a profound awareness of what that bullet had just accomplished. Mahmoud Teherani would never fund another IED, never finance another ambush, never contribute to the death of another American soldier. TOC. This is Overwatch 3, Chun said into the radio, his voice professionally calm despite the extraordinary circumstances. Target is neutralized. Repeat, Tehrani is down. Confirmed kill at 4,807 meters. The response came back immediately, Captain Hollister's voice carrying undisguised amazement. Overwatch 3, confirmed distance. Did you say 4,800 meters? Affirmative, sir, Chen replied. Laser range finder confirms 4,807 meters. One shot, one kill. Corporal Voss made the shot. There was a pause on the radio, and Elena could imagine the scene in the TOC, officers and enlisted personnel trying to process what they'd just heard. 4,800 meters wasn't just difficult. It was beyond what most military professionals would consider tactically feasible. Outstanding, Hollister finally said. Extract immediately. We'll have a full debrief when you return. The team began breaking down their position with practiced efficiency, packing equipment, and preparing for the long patrol back to the vehicle pickup point. But Ibarra paused long enough to grip Elena's shoulder firmly. That adjustment you made at the last second, he said. The wind shear calculation. How did you even spot that? Elena secured her rifle in its case. The mirage pattern wasn't matching my wind readings. Had to be a thermal boundary, creating differential wind speed at altitude. I didn't have time to calculate it precisely, just estimated based on the mirage behavior. You estimated a 3 mil correction based on mirage behavior and nailed a 4,800-meter shot, Ibarra said, shaking his head. That's not estimation, Corporal. That's something close to supernatural. It's just physics, Staff Sergeant. Elena shouldered her pack, feeling the weight settle across her shoulders. The atmosphere behaves according to consistent principles. If you understand those principles, you can predict behavior even without perfect data. Most snipers with 20 years experience couldn't have made that shot, Chun said as they began moving out. Hell, most snipers wouldn't have even attempted it. But you saw the problem, solved it in real time, and executed perfectly under pressure. That's mastery-level skill. They patrolled back through the rough terrain, maintaining tactical spacing and security protocols. The sun had fully risen now, temperature climbing toward what would be another scorching Afghan day. But Elena barely noticed the heat, her mind still processing the mathematics of what she'd just accomplished. The vehicle pickup went smoothly, and they were back at FOB Rhino by 0900. Word had already spread across the base, and Marines lined up to watch the sniper team return. The crowd was larger than after the Kazemi shot, more animated. The buzz of conversation focused entirely on the impossible distance and the impossibly young Marine who'd made it happen. Captain Hollister met them at the vehicle bay with Lieutenant Ashford and Gunnery Sergeant Brennan, who'd remained at base for command and control. The captain's expression was somewhere between impressed and disbelieving. Corporal Voss, he said formally, I need to hear directly from you. Did you engage a target at 4,807 meters and achieve a confirmed kill with a single shot? Yes, sir, Elena replied. Target was Mahmoud Tehrani, confirmed visual identification by Staff Sergeant Ibarra prior to engagement. And you calculated the firing solution yourself? Accounted for all environmental variables at that distance? Yes, sir. With assistance from Staff Sergeant Ibarra on wind calls and environmental data collection. Hollister turned to Ibarra. Staff Sergeant, your assessment of the shot? Ibarra stood at attention, his response measured and professional. Sir, in 15 years as a sniper and spotter, I have never witnessed a more technically difficult shot executed with greater precision. Corporal Voss identified environmental factors that I missed, made a last-second correction for wind shear that proved critical, and engaged the target at a distance that exceeds any confirmed military kill shot in history. It was extraordinary marksmanship combined with extraordinary intellectual capability. The captain nodded slowly, processing that assessment. Lieutenant Ashford stepped forward, tablet in hand. Sir, I've been researching confirmed long-range kills. The current record is a Canadian sniper at 3,500 meters in Iraq, 2017. Corporal Voss just exceeded that by over 1,300 meters. This isn't just a record. It's a complete redefinition of what's considered possible. Brennan spoke up, his voice carrying the weight of his experience. Sir, if I may, What Corporal Voss has demonstrated over the past month isn't just exceptional shooting. It's a fundamental advancement in understanding extreme-range marksmanship. She's developed methodologies that didn't exist in military doctrine, calculated solutions that most snipers would consider impossible, and executed under combat conditions that would break lesser Marines. She's not just the best sniper I've worked with. She's potentially the best I've encountered in my entire career. Elena felt her face flush at the praise, uncomfortable with the attention, but unable to deny the accuracy of what Brennan was saying. She had pushed the boundaries of what was possible, had proven that mathematical precision combined with skilled execution could achieve results others considered purely theoretical. Hollister's expression shifted from amazement to decision-making mode. Corporal Voss, effective immediately, you are appointed as the primary instructor for Operation Longshot. You will develop curriculum, train selected personnel in your methodologies, and establish doctrine for extreme-range precision fire. This is a formal assignment that supersedes your normal duties. Gunnery Sergeant Brennan will provide oversight and tactical integration. Understood, sir, Elena replied. Additionally, I am recommending you for the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism. 2 high-value targets eliminated at distances that exceeded all known military capabilities under combat conditions with perfect execution. That represents the highest level of professional skill and courage. The Navy Cross was the second highest military decoration for valor, exceeded only by the Medal of Honor. Elena felt the magnitude of that recognition settle over her, understanding that her career had just taken a trajectory she'd never imagined possible when she'd stepped off that Chinook helicopter a month ago. "Thank you, sir," she managed to say, her voice steady despite the emotion churning inside. The debrief lasted 3 hours, every detail of the mission analyzed and documented. Elena walked the command staff through her calculations, explained her methodology for detecting and correcting for the wind shear, described the environmental factors that had influenced her firing solution. Officers took notes, asked technical questions, requested clarification on mathematical formulas and physical principles. By the time it concluded, Elena was exhausted, not from the mission itself, but from the intensity of explaining and justifying her methods to people who didn't have her mathematical background. But she recognized the necessity. If Operation Longshot was going to become doctrine, others needed to understand not just what she'd done, but how and why it worked. Brennan found her afterward in Building 3, where she'd retreated to clean her rifle and process everything that had happened. He sat down across from her, his expression thoughtful. "You know what you've done, right?" he said quietly. "You've changed what's possible. Every sniper in the military is going to study your methods, try to replicate what you've achieved. You're 21 years old, and you've already left a mark on military history that will last decades." Elena looked up from her rifle. "I just did the math, Gunnery Sergeant. Applied physics to a tactical problem." "No," Brennan said firmly. "You did far more than that. You saw possibilities others couldn't see, trusted yourself when everyone said something was impossible, and executed with a level of precision that defies belief. That's not just mathematics. That's courage and vision and skill all combined." He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Voss, I'm glad I was wrong about you. Glad the captain overruled my initial assessment and gave you a chance. You've taught this old Marine that age and experience aren't everything. Sometimes the newest voice is the one that needs to be heard." As Brennan left, Elena returned to cleaning her rifle, but her mind was elsewhere. 4,807 meters. 6 seconds of bullet flight. One shot that had eliminated a high-value target and simultaneously proven that the impossible was simply the difficult not yet attempted. The weeks following the Tehrani shot transformed Elena's role completely. She was no longer just a sniper in Brennan's section. She was the architect of a new capability that was drawing attention from the highest levels of military command. Officers from other bases requested consultations. Special operations units wanted to understand her methodologies. The Marine Corps was preparing to incorporate her techniques into official sniper training doctrine. Operation Longshot officially launched 3 weeks after the Tehrani kill, with Elena as chief instructor and Brennan as tactical commander. They selected 6 experienced snipers from various units across theater, Marines who demonstrated not just shooting proficiency, but the intellectual capacity to master the complex mathematics Elena's system required. The first training session took place on the range with all 6 snipers gathered around as Elena stood at a whiteboard. These Marines were seasoned combat veterans, most with multiple deployments and dozens of confirmed kills between them. Teaching them felt surreal, but their expressions showed genuine respect and eagerness to learn. Extreme range shooting isn't about taking longer shots with the same techniques. Elena began, marker in hand. It requires completely rethinking how we approach the problem. At distances beyond 3,000 meters, every assumption you've relied on breaks down. Standard ballistic tables become meaningless. Environmental factors that were minor considerations at shorter ranges become mission-critical variables. She drew a diagram showing bullet trajectory over distance, marking different zones where different factors dominated. From 0 to 1,000 meters, your primary concerns are wind and basic trajectory. From 1,000 to 2,000, you add temperature and air density as significant factors. Beyond 3,000, you're dealing with wind layers at multiple altitudes, temperature gradients, barometric pressure differentials, Coriolis effect, spin drift, and a dozen other variables that each contribute small but cumulative changes to bullet behavior. One of the snipers, a staff sergeant named Marcus Reeves with 8 years of experience, raised his hand. How do you keep track of all those variables in a combat situation? Seems like you'd need a computer and hours of calculation time. Elena smiled. That's exactly what most people think, which is why extreme range shooting has been considered impractical. But if you understand the underlying physics and practice the calculations enough, they become intuitive. You're not doing raw math every time. You're recognizing patterns and applying formulas you've internalized through repetition. She spent the next hour walking them through her systematic approach to environmental assessment, showing them how to read atmospheric conditions at different elevations, how to estimate wind behavior between firing position and target, how to calculate temperature gradient effects in real time. The Marines took notes furiously, asked intelligent questions, and gradually began to grasp the complexity of what Elena had mastered. The practical application came next. Elena had them work through firing solutions for various distances and conditions, checking their calculations against her own. Some picked up the concepts quickly. Others struggled with the mathematical density of the problems. But all of them showed dedication to learning, understanding that they were being trained in something that could fundamentally change how precision fire missions were executed. Staff Sergeant Reeves proved particularly adept at the calculations, his engineering background providing a foundation for understanding the physics involved. After the session, he approached Elena with a question that had clearly been bothering him. "Corporal," he said, then caught himself. "I know rank, but it feels strange calling you corporal when you're teaching me things I didn't think were possible. How do you want us to address you?" Elena considered that. She was acutely aware of the awkwardness of being junior in rank, but senior in this specific expertise. "Corporal is fine, Staff Sergeant. I'm not trying to subvert the rank structure. I'm just sharing what I've learned." Reeves nodded, but his expression suggested he saw the deeper issue. "You've developed something that's going to change military doctrine. That puts you in a unique position. You're going to have field-grade officers seeking your advice, generals wanting briefings on your methodology. Rank becomes complicated when expertise exceeds position." "I'll deal with that when it happens," Elena replied. "For now, I'm focused on making sure Operation Longshot is successful." The training continued for 6 weeks, intensive and demanding. Elena pushed her students hard, requiring them to achieve calculation accuracy within acceptable margins before allowing them to attempt actual long-range shots. Brennan supervised the tactical integration, ensuring that the extreme-range capability could be employed effectively within existing operational frameworks. Lieutenant Ashford coordinated with intelligence assets to identify potential targets and missions suitable for extreme range engagement. She'd become one of Elena's strongest advocates, regularly briefing higher command on the program's progress and pushing for expanded resources and authorization. The first operational deployment of a trained Operation Longshot team happened in the 7th week. Staff Sergeant Reeves and his spotter successfully engaged a Taliban commander at 3,800 meters, using Elena's methodology to calculate the firing solution. The shot was perfect, the target eliminated, and the mission proved that Elena's techniques could be taught and replicated by other skilled snipers. More missions followed. Teams deployed to observation points across the province, waiting for high-value targets to appear within their extended engagement range. Success rates were high, approaching 70% when conditions were favorable. The Taliban's command structure was being systematically dismantled by snipers they couldn't see or defend against, firing from distances they hadn't known were possible. Elena found herself in an unusual position. She was still a corporal, still technically junior to nearly everyone she worked with, but her expertise commanded respect that transcended rank. Officers consulted her on tactical planning. Senior enlisted sought her advice on equipment and techniques. She'd become the subject matter expert on a capability that didn't exist before she'd created it. But with that recognition came pressure. Every mission failure was scrutinized to understand what went wrong. Every successful shot was analyzed to confirm it matched doctrinal methodology. Elena felt the weight of being responsible not just for her own performance, but for an entire operational concept that bore her fingerprints. Brennan noticed the stress accumulating and pulled her aside one afternoon after a particularly intense mission debrief. "You're carrying too much," he said bluntly. "You've created something revolutionary, but that doesn't mean you're personally responsible for every shot every sniper takes." "I know that, Gunnery Sergeant," Elena replied. "But if the methodology fails, if we lose credibility because someone misapplies the techniques, the whole program could be shut down." "Then we make sure people are properly trained," Brennan said. "We establish standards, create certification requirements, and trust that the Marines we've selected are professionals who can execute. You can't personally oversee every mission. That's not sustainable." He was right, Elena knew. But letting go of control over something she'd built from mathematical first principles wasn't easy. She'd proven the concept with her own shots, validated every calculation through personal execution. Trusting others to maintain that standard required faith she was still developing. The breakpoint came during the 8th week, when a long-range team took a low-probability shot against Elena's recommendation and missed, alerting the target and compromising the mission. The team leader had overruled her tactical assessment, believing his experience justified the risk. The failure was documented in the after-action report, and command wanted Elena's assessment. She sat in the TOC with Captain Hollister, Lieutenant Ashford, and Brennan, reviewing the mission details. The team leader had made a judgment call that proved wrong, but Elena understood the pressure to engage when targets were rare and opportunities fleeting. "Your assessment, Corporal?" Hollister asked. "Was this a methodology failure or an execution failure?" "Neither, sir," Elena replied carefully. "It was a judgment failure. The environmental conditions didn't support engagement at that distance and those wind speeds. I recommended holding for better conditions, but the team leader made a command decision to engage anyway. The mathematics were sound. The decision to attempt the shot despite unfavorable conditions was questionable. Should we have stricter engagement criteria?" Ashford asked. "Remove some of the tactical discretion from team leaders?" Elena shook her head. "No, ma'am. Team leaders need the authority to make decisions based on ground truth and tactical situation. But they also need to trust the mathematical assessment when it says conditions aren't right." This wasn't a failure of the program. It was a reminder that even with perfect methodology, judgment and discipline are still required. Hollister nodded slowly. "Understood. We'll incorporate that into the training curriculum. Emphasis on knowing when not to shoot being as important as knowing how to shoot." The incident became a teaching point rather than a crisis, strengthening the program by acknowledging its limitations. Elena developed decision matrices to help team leaders evaluate whether conditions supported engagement, giving them structured tools for making judgment calls under pressure. By the 10th week, Operation Longshot had achieved 18 successful high-value target eliminations at ranges between 3,500 and 4,400 meters. The program was being cited in briefings all the way up to theater command level. Plans were being made to expand it to other geographic areas and incorporate the methodology into formal Marine Corps sniper training. Elena received word that her Navy Cross recommendation had been approved, with the awards ceremony scheduled for the following month. She'd also been selected for meritorious promotion to sergeant, jumping over corporal based on her exceptional performance and the strategic value of her contributions. One evening, as the sun set over FOB Rhino, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Elena sat on the roof of Building 3 with her rifle beside her. She'd come to Afghanistan expecting to prove she could do the job despite her age. Instead, she'd redefined what the job could be, creating something that would outlast her deployment and influence how precision marksmanship was practiced for years to come. Brennan climbed up to join her, 2 bottles of water in hand. He passed her one and sat down, looking out over the base and the mountains beyond. "Thought I'd find you up here," he said. "Just thinking," Elena replied, "about how different things are from when I arrived." "You mean when I treated you like a liability and questioned whether you belonged here?" Brennan asked with a slight smile. "Something like that." He was quiet for a moment, then spoke with the kind of honesty that came from mutual respect. "You taught me something important, Voss. That assumptions are dangerous, that potential comes in unexpected packages, and that sometimes the person everyone underestimates is exactly the one who'll change everything. I won't forget that lesson." As darkness settled over the base and stars emerged in the Afghan sky, Elena felt a sense of completion. She'd proven herself beyond any doubt, earned respect from the hardest critics, and created something meaningful that would save lives long after she rotated home. The mathematics had been perfect, but more importantly, the courage to trust those mathematics in the face of skepticism had been enough. The award ceremony took place on a clear morning with the entire base assembled in formation. Elena stood at attention in her dress uniform, feeling surreal as Captain Hollister read the citation for her Navy Cross. The words described her actions in clinical military language, but they couldn't capture the reality of those moments. The pressure of impossible shots, the weight of lives hanging on mathematical precision, the courage required to trust her calculations when everyone else said they were too young to matter. For extraordinary heroism while serving as a scout sniper, Hollister read, his voice carrying across the assembled formation. Corporal Voss displayed exceptional courage and tactical proficiency by engaging and eliminating 2 high-value enemy targets at unprecedented distances under combat conditions. Her actions directly prevented numerous American casualties and significantly disrupted enemy operations throughout the province. By her bold initiative, technical expertise, and total dedication to duty, Corporal Voss reflected great credit upon herself and upheld the highest traditions of the Marine Corps and the United States Naval Service. He pinned the medal to her uniform, the distinctive ribbon with its center stripe of navy blue flanked by white and red. Elena saluted crisply, maintaining her composure despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. This was what she'd worked for, what she'd proven herself worthy of receiving. Not because of her age or despite it, but simply because of what she'd accomplished. The formation was dismissed, and Marines crowded around to offer congratulations. Staff Sergeant Reeves shook her hand firmly. "You've changed how all of us think about what's possible, Sergeant Voss," he said, using her new rank. "That's a legacy that'll last long after we've all rotated home." Chun and Ibarra approached together, both grinning. "We've been keeping count," Chun said. 19 high-value targets eliminated using your methodology across 4 provinces. That's 19 terrorists who won't kill Americans, won't plant IEDs, won't fund operations against us. You've saved more lives than most Marines do in entire careers. Lieutenant Ashford was next, her congratulations more measured, but no less genuine. "I knew you were capable of extraordinary things," she said quietly. "But even I didn't anticipate just how much impact one person could have. The intelligence community is already studying your operations to understand how we can better integrate extreme-range precision fires into broader strategic planning." The celebration continued through the afternoon, but Elena felt herself being pulled toward Building 3, toward the familiar space where she'd spent so many hours calculating and preparing. She found Brennan there, as she'd known she would, sitting at the table they'd shared for countless mission briefings. "Needed a break from the attention?" he asked as she entered. "Something like that," Elena replied, taking a seat across from him. "It's overwhelming, all the recognition." "Get used to it," Brennan said. "You're going to be dealing with attention for a long time. The Marine Corps doesn't create many legends, but you've earned that status. 21 years old with a Navy Cross and a verified world record kill. That's the kind of career-defining moment most Marines only dream about." Elena looked at her hands, at the calluses from rifle work and the small scars from field work. "I just did the math, Gunnery Sergeant. Calculated solutions that others hadn't tried to calculate." "No," Brennan said firmly. "You saw possibilities that others dismissed as impossible. You had the courage to trust yourself when everyone, including me, doubted you. And you executed with a level of precision that redefined what this community thought was achievable. That's not just mathematics. That's vision and courage and skill all combined into something exceptional." He pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "These are orders," he said. "You're being transferred to Quantico after this deployment ends. Marine Corps wants you developing curriculum for the Scout Sniper School, incorporating your methodologies into how we train the next generation. You'll be teaching instructors who will then teach thousands of Marines over the coming years." Elena opened the folder, scanning the official orders. It was an extraordinary assignment for someone her age and rank, but made sense. The knowledge she developed was too valuable to remain locked in her own experience. It needed to be systematized, documented, and transmitted to others who could carry it forward. "What about Operation Longshot here?" she asked. "The program still needs oversight. Staff Sergeant Reeves is being promoted to Gunnery Sergeant and will take over as primary instructor," Brennan replied. "He's mastered your methodology, has the respect of the other snipers, and has the experience to run operations without direct supervision. The program will continue without you, which is exactly what should happen. You built something sustainable, not something dependent on your personal involvement." "That was the goal," Elena acknowledged. "But still hard to let go." "That's natural," Brennan said. "But your impact is bigger than this one base or this one deployment. You're going to shape how the Marine Corps approaches precision marksmanship for decades. That's a rare opportunity." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Two Marines who'd come to respect each other through shared experiences and mutual challenge. Elena thought about her arrival at FOB Rhino, about Brennan's initial skepticism and dismissal, about the long journey from being seen as a liability to being recognized as an innovator. "Can I ask you something, Gunnery Sergeant?" Elena said finally. "When you look at me now, do you still see a kid who looks too young for the job?" Brennan smiled slightly. "No, Sergeant Bus. When I look at you now, I see a Marine who taught me that age is just a number, that potential can't be measured by years of service, and that sometimes the most valuable perspective comes from the person everyone underestimates. I see someone who made me a better leader by forcing me to question my assumptions." Elena felt tears threatening, but held them back. "Thank you, Gunnery Sergeant, for giving me the chance, even when you had doubts. For trusting Captain Hollister's judgment when he overruled your initial assessment. For everything you've taught me about leadership and professionalism." "You earned every opportunity you received," Brennan replied. "I just stopped standing in your way long enough for everyone else to see what I should have recognized from the beginning." The deployment ended 6 weeks later, and Elena found herself boarding the same type of Chinook helicopter that had brought her to FOB Rhino 4 months earlier. But everything was different now. She wore sergeant chevrons on her collar, a Navy Cross on her dress uniform, and carried the knowledge that she'd fundamentally changed an aspect of military operations. The base had assembled to see the departing Marines off, and Elena saw familiar faces in the crowd. The snipers she'd trained, the officers who'd supported her, the countless Marines who'd been touched by Operation Longshot's success. They applauded as she walked to the helicopter, a send-off usually reserved for senior officers or exceptional circumstances. Brennan was there too, standing at attention. As Elena passed, he saluted, a gesture of respect between equals rather than superior to subordinate. She returned the salute crisply, a final acknowledgement of the journey they'd shared. The helicopter lifted off, and Elena watched FOB Rhino grow smaller below her. The mountains of Afghanistan stretched to every horizon, beautiful and harsh, and utterly indifferent to the human dramas played out within them. Somewhere down there, in valleys and on ridgelines, other Marines were using the techniques she developed to engage targets at impossible distances. The mathematics she'd mastered were being applied by others who'd never met her, saving lives she'd never know about. If you enjoyed this story and it resonated with you, drop a comment and let us know your favorite moment, or share if you've ever had to prove yourself against overwhelming doubt. Maybe you've been the person who had to show that age or appearance don't define capability, that sometimes the person everyone underestimates is exactly the one who changes everything. As the helicopter carried her away from the combat zone and toward the next chapter of her career, Elena pulled out her notebook and began working through a new calculation. The flight path from Helmand Province to Kandahar Airfield, adjusted for altitude and wind conditions, optimized for fuel efficiency and time. Even in transit, her mind sought problems to solve, patterns to understand, mathematics to master. She was 21 years old. She'd eliminated high-value targets at distances others considered impossible. She'd created operational doctrine that would influence military tactics for years to come. She'd earned a Navy Cross and the respect of the hardest critics in one of the most demanding specialties in the military. But more importantly, she'd proven something fundamental about potential and possibility. That youth wasn't weakness, but rather fresh perspective unencumbered by assumptions about what couldn't be done. That sometimes the person everyone said was too young, too inexperienced, too unlikely to succeed was precisely the person who'd see solutions others missed. The mathematics had been perfect. The calculations had been precise. The bullets had flown true across impossible distances, guided by physics and faith in equal measure. Elena Voss had arrived in Afghanistan as an untested corporal who looked like she belonged in high school. She was leaving as Sergeant Voss, an instructor who would shape the next generation of Marine snipers, and whose name would be remembered whenever someone discussed the limits of precision marksmanship. They'd said she was too young. They'd been wrong. And in proving them wrong, she'd changed not just her own trajectory, but the trajectory of everyone who came after her, showing that the impossible was simply the difficult not yet calculated, that distance was just another variable to account for, and that age mattered far less than courage, skill, and the willingness to trust yourself when no one else would. The helicopter banked toward Kandahar, and Elena smiled slightly, already thinking about the curriculum she'd develop at Quantico, the students she'd train, the legacy she'd build. The mathematics of war were brutal and unforgiving, but they were also beautiful in their precision, elegant in their consistency. And Elena Voss had proven herself their master.